Welcome to The Pursuit, a podcast produced by the Chicago Midwest chapter of NADIS. We are a group of emerging media professionals and leaders in our fields. I'm Kinsley Reliford, a sideline reporter, and I'll be your host for today's episode. Our special guest today is Dionne Miller, who's a prominent sportscaster on ABC7 Eyewitness news team. Joining ABC7 in 2014 and originally born in Pennsylvania, Dionne graduated from Houghton College in New York with a Bachelor of Arts in Professional Writing and English Literature. She has worked for multiple broadcasting networks such as Fox Chicago and the Columbus Sports Network, WCSN. Throughout this podcast episode, Dionne and I will dive into some of the difficulties that women entering into the sports world face, as well as what it takes to succeed in this competitive industry. We now welcome Dionne Miller onto the Pursuit podcast. Dionne, I want to thank you so much for being here today. And I really want to get right into this interview and ask you a question that I've had for a long time now. So it seems like, especially in the sports industry, it really requires you to start from the bottom and work your way up. Do you agree with this?
Eventually, you won't have to do that anymore. Like eventually you'll work your way. If you put in the work doing that, you can move out of it. Then I've also had interns who never had to work in a market where they shot their own stuff. They went right to something that allowed them to be on air and do broadcast without having to do the behind the scenes stuff, like producing their own thing. I had to do that. That was part of my journey, but not everybody has to. I don't think it's as much of a requirement anymore. I just think, like, for the kind of broadcaster that I want to be, I want to understand the value of those other roles around me. And so that's why it was important for me to know how to do those things. And then the industry is changing and evolving so much. And there may be a day where they ask me again. If they ask me to pick up a camera, I'm going to politely decline and say, thank you, this was a really fun journey. But if they ask me to produce, I know how to do those things, right? I know how to edit, and I learned how to do those things, and I'm willing to learn to do those things because I love my job still, if that makes sense. So I think it's important to know. I don't know if it's a requirement like it was 15 to 20 years ago.
Going off of that, when young college graduates are trying to get into that entire field, do you think it makes them a more likely candidate if they have had that experience compared to somebody that hasn't had it?
It can if they're it depends on what they're applying for. I think if you are trying very hard to just get in the door, having the ability and the willingness and the attitude to do it all is a big deal. There are some people, Kinsley, that wanted to be in broadcast. I had friends who wanted to be in broadcast, got their first job in Casper, Wyoming, making $18,000 a year, and just were like, this is not for me. And I think that news directors know that, right? And so if someone is willing to put in that work, it says a lot about your character, and that you want it bad enough that you'll do what it takes to get in the door, to show them what you can do, and then grow from there. And so I think that I would encourage everyone to learn it, to at least embrace it. If it's truly the business you want to work in, you have to be willing to evolve and try different things and understand what is happening around you and what's necessary to make the news look the way that it does. I think so. I think it's important. I feel like I just answered the same question twice, but I do think that I would encourage someone to do it and think that it would make you a more valuable candidate because you have those skills and also the willingness to do it.
Absolutely. And I would say too, just from my little experience of working in the sports industry, it's honestly one of the hardest jobs I've ever had. It takes so much sacrifice and so much time and devotion, just putting in that time. So anybody that advances in that specific career, it's impressive. It's a lot of dedication.
Yeah, I mean, it does take a lot of dedication. And if you really want to do this in on TV, you sacrifice a lot. I miss a lot of things. I have kids, and my kids are my favorite people in the whole world, but I miss a lot, they're in junior high, and I have a fourth grader, and I'm gone a lot. I have to work holidays and stuff like that, but I also love the job, and I just feel like God's placed me here right now, maybe not forever, but right now, right? And so I feel like there are sacrifices that you make, but there are also awesome rewards for it. And so I'll do it as long as I can, I guess, until I feel like it's not the right move for me. But it takes a lot. People ask me, who's your favorite music artist? I don't know. I listen to sports talk radio. Like, I'm just like, I'm listening to stuff all the time. I'm always trying to stay ahead and to write differently. And writing is, I cannot emphasize enough that writing for television is the number one skill that anyone in broadcasting needs to understand. Writing for television. It is a skill. It is something I work on every single day, because there are shows that I anchor that are only 2.5 minutes long. The whole show, the whole sportscast. Well, I don't want to just do 2 stories. I want to do 5. So how do I get the news across in a succinct manner where I'm only writing like for 12 seconds and setting up a soundbite that's only 15 seconds, and that gives my viewer still the same story, right?
Right.
That's a challenge I love. I love embracing that challenge and feeling like I got it. But that's the other aspect that I want to make sure everyone understands. When you get into this business, you might be at first asked to produce and edit and shoot your own stuff and all that, but also writing. But eventually your only job will be writing. That's my only job right now, is writing and delivering the news. And so that's a skill that you have to know, that you have to sharpen all the time. Because that's my job now, is to make sure that I write for news in a way that gets the story across to my viewer in a succinct and timely and hopefully entertaining manner.
So would you say that writing for on air is more important than the on air delivery?
No, but if you're comfortable with your if you are able to write in your voice and you're comfortable on air, which is the on-air presentation is the number one aspect. But if you're comfortable with your voice and your writing, and you're familiar with your own writing, then it sounds conversational. And that's the goal, is you want it to sound like you're just talking to the camera, or you're talking to your mom. That's how I always think, like I'm talking to my mom. But for news is far different to me than like a regional sports network or ESPN or something like that, because a junkie is watching ESPN. My mom just forgot to turn the TV off after weather, right? So she doesn't understand the nuance of the offensive line for the Bears. She'll maybe know a couple names, but to her, like, she only knows Justin Fields, right? So I try to think about that when I'm writing too, is that I want to meet my viewer where they're at. Most of our news viewers are probably older. They're not on their phones all day. So you have to give them just the basics. They're not the junkie that's watching sports all the time. That's a different audience. Does that make sense?
That does make sense, yeah.
So when you're doing stuff for news, I want it to sound conversational because I'm in their home. And I want them to be able to understand it. So it needs to sort of be simple to understand.
Sure.
And that's a challenge for a sports junkie, because I want to tell them all this needless information that I know, but I also know that doesn't benefit them. So that's the challenge that I navigate every day. I want to make sure that what I'm giving them is conversational and comfortable, so that when I'm on while they're making dinner, it just sounds like I'm just in the background and it isn't hard to understand.
So I know you touched on the junkies a little bit. I know, like, as a woman in sports, a lot of people are often like, women are like easier to pick on, and like men are more critical of women, being more apt to point out their mistakes. Have you personally experienced that?
Yes, a lot, like everywhere I've worked. I think that because I know where my identity is, it doesn't bother me as much as it could. No. Some days are better than others. Let me admit that. Sometimes I read things that I'm like, oh, I did not want to read that. 90% of the time, it's about my appearance more than it is what I said, which I know doesn't happen for men. But most of it's like, if my hair looks weird, or I wore a dress that nobody liked, or whatever. I mean, then I'm like, yes, but did you even hear what I said? Well, no, they didn't, right? So, like, that's frustrating. I do get corrected a lot, and my initial response is always to write back and be like, well, if you knew, then why do you care what I said? Like, that's what I want to write. I don't say that. But I also, like, we're human. We're on TV, and yes, we're on TV, but like, they don't know what happened throughout the rest of my day that made me exhausted for that moment, and I misread the prompter, or I wrote down a stat wrong. And I have people who watch that stuff for me, and we still make mistakes because we're human beings, but I have felt that I've had to work harder to prove that I deserve the jobs that I get. Even in the year of our Lord 2023, I still feel like I have to prove that I can hang with a man in a main role. I have to prove that to people, and that is exhausting and frustrating. And I don't know how that ever changes. If it's happened, forever, I don't know that it ever changes. I don't know. I don't know if that, but I also understand that I signed up for that, right? Like, it's not news. This is not new that it's harder for me. I knew that going in. So, okay, I'll work harder. That's fine. I'll outwork you. That's okay. I'm competitive enough to say that. That's okay. I'll outwork you. That's fine. And those who really like know you and love you understand that you are just as good, and you can't let that intimidate you from pursuing what you want. But I do feel like there's always a double standard with it. Always. And I can't change it myself, but there's always a double standard in pay, still in pay. I don't
It's
give
still
a
in
what
pay?
men do. Oh yeah.
I didn't realize it was still like that. I thought there was like equal pay for men and women in
No,
sports.
one would think that is the law in Illinois, but it's I don't know why broadcast is like outside of that. It's not this. It's not equal.
That's
Which
ridiculous.
I know,
Are,
it's very
are
frustrating.
there women in the industry that are speaking up on this? Like,
I don't. If they are, I'm not hearing it. I also am very busy, so maybe, but I don't think that. I mean, no one really talks about it, and I don't understand that. Like, it's hard, and sometimes I think it's they don't think we're doing the same job or something. I don't know. I really don't know why that is. And it gets my husband pretty fired up sometimes. He's like, it's so unfair. You're doing the
yeah,
exact same job. And according to like state law, it says you have to be paid the same amount of money.
right.
And they don't view it that way. There's always been this hierarchy in television, and they don't view it that way. And I don't know why that's been the exception. I really don't.
Is that just through ABC that they're not paying the same, or do you think it's through like
No. I
NBC,
think it's across the
ESPN?
board. I think it's across the board, and I also know that they're paid less to television people across the board. That's the golden age of television people making loads of money was probably mid '90s when I was in high school. You know what I mean? Like I
Yeah.
missed that, and I got in on kind of the tail end of
Mhm.
that golden age. But now all those people are retiring, and no one wants to pay that kind of money again.
Mm.
I mean, the weather guy at WGN, Tom Skilling, I did not know this, but he, I guess, very publicly signed a 10-year, $10 million contract 10 years ago.
Okay.
That's like, not even, I can't even tell you like with a fraction that I make of that. Like, it's not even
Really?
close. And that's just, it was just a different world when that was happening. And, and it is very, very different now. Companies are willing to invest that kind of money in an on-air talent because they don't know where the industry is going because of social media, because everybody's getting information on their phones,
Mhm.
and it's happening so fast. Now, I will say in sports, it does appear that industries, or I mean, stations and networks are willing to invest in live sports because that seems to be the one thing that you can't know until it's happening, right? Like you could only
Right.
know it in real time, so people are still tuning in for that stuff.
Okay.
And so for the news, we're always trying to figure out how do we reach the audience that's watching on their phones or that already knows the score, or how do we make it entertaining and creative for them, even if they do know the score, right? So those are the challenges that the industry presents now that are different than they were 10 years ago. So I almost argue that our job is harder, although 15 to 20 years ago, they didn't have the internet, so they didn't know the scores, right? So I don't, it's just it's a different world now than it was back when they were giving out really big contracts to TV people.
Yeah, I was completely under the assumption that TV people were still making that kind of money, like millions, hundreds of thousands. I didn't realize it was
I mean, I am very blessed, but no, it is not like it used to be.
Do you think it'll ever get back to what it once was? Or
It
now
would
that-
have to change a lot. I know that things. I laughed the other day. Somebody told me that there was like a 45% increase in cassette tape sales. Like
Interesting.
cassette tapes are from like the early '80s, right?
Mhm.
So I wondered, does everything come around like that? Like will people start watching the news again, and it'll be super popular and really cool and swag to watch the news at night.
Really nice.
But I don't know. I honestly don't know, and that's what networks are struggling with. Like, do we continue to invest in this? Because we don't know if it will come back and people will start watching it locally. I do feel that in a market like Chicago, people who live in Chicago want to hear their news from Chicago people.
Right.
That matters here. And so I do feel like I have some stability in that, but there are some stations around the country in smaller markets who have eliminated sports altogether. Don't even have a local sports team.
So
Isn't
then
that crazy?
all those people
No,
are just cut completely then.
yeah, right. There's dozens of people that are just cut completely, and I don't know. I don't do enough. I don't have time to do enough research on like that the like percentages of that, or if what happens when that happens, is it missed in the newscast? Are they replacing it with something different? I don't know if that's what's happening, but I do know that there are many stations across the board that have eliminated sports. And they do it for the reason of they think that everybody can get their highlights somewhere else. They don't need to wait for us, which is
so
true.
sad.
Sadly, it's true. There are some people who wait for us, some people who just only get it from us because they happen to be watching.
Sure.
But it's a tough thing to navigate. It really is.
Yeah. The phones have completely changed everything, honestly.
Yeah,
Social
everything.
media too. I did have one last question because I want to be mindful of your time and I know how busy you are. But for a sports comm major or communications major that's entering this field, if you had like one piece of advice that you could give to your younger self, what would it be?
Oh, don't worry about anybody else's journey. Honestly, it is so hard. This is a competitive field. This is a very subjective field. You might apply for a job that you would be awesome at, but they would like an Asian man, and that's not you. And there's nothing you can change about that. I once had a news director tell me that she knows within 3 seconds of watching a tape, 3 seconds, if she wants to talk to them. 3 seconds.
Goodness.
And we work so hard on those resume reels and like making sure we put our best foot forward. And I would always tell people, like, you don't waste your time with a long resume tape. They'll know within a minute if they want to talk to you. A minute. And so I spent so much of my early career worrying about what was happening to other people instead of just focusing on what was best for my career and where I was going. And I mean, my faith plays a huge role in all of that and helping me to kind of stay focused on my journey. But that's the one thing that I wish I had told myself, my young Dionne, that I would have said, enjoy living in these places. Don't be in such a hurry to get to the next stop. It will be there. It'll be there. That door will open when it's ready to open. Like, it will all be there. And you don't have to worry that somebody else got there before you. There's plenty to go around. There really is. And what is great for, like, I sometimes I still battle this whole, like, oh, I should have gone to ESPN, or I should have really pushed to go there. I mean, I have an awesome life. I love my family. I love where we live. I enjoy what I do. Like, you can't put a price on that, right? Like, that to me is what is important. And I don't need to compare myself to other people and worry about that. I wish that I had focused more on what I was doing. And also the other thing would be just to be willing to do the work and just know that it matters. Know that it matters. Like, you may not, the one thing that our industry lacks and which does a poor job of is saying, you did a good job on that. Like, nobody ever says that. They only talk to you when something bad happens.
Yeah, exactly.
But, I think that owning that and be like, I did do a good job. And that was good work, and being proud of that good work. And I think that's part of it too, not waiting for someone else to tell you did a good job, but being confident in the work that you're doing, knowing that you're working really hard and you're willing to work hard.
Absolutely.
And just trust that it will pay off. It will pay off.
Dionne, I just want to say thank you again for your time. This has been The Pursuit, a Natus Junior Board podcast.